Hello, everyone, and welcome back. This next session is titled The Newsroom in 2022 and Beyond, AI in the Newsroom. With the advancement of technology, there are many opportunities to incorporate tech into the newsroom. Indeed, some of the more progressive media organizations already have. But generally, the adoption in technology in our industry has been lagging most others. However, we are seeing a trend and perhaps even a tipping point in terms of increasing number of media companies are beginning to see the benefits of tech, including automation and the use of artificial intelligence, not only in the editorial process, but also increasingly in reader engagement as well as subscription revenue. Indeed, 3/4 of global publishers surveyed in the WAN-IFRA Schickler study said that AI will be an important part of their success in 3 years. We will share the link of this report in the discussion forum of the events platform later in the session. Before we start, once again, here are some housekeeping announcements. If you have any questions, please post them in the live Q&A box at the bottom. For social media posts, please tag us at #AsianMediaLeaders and also at WAN-IFRA. For Twitter, our handle is at Newsconf, NEWSCONF. Our moderator for this session is Chia Lun Huan, Transformation and Learning Director, Commonwealth Magazine, Taiwan. Chia Lun is responsible for business operations in Commonwealth Magazine, overseeing internal operations and communications, external branding, and strategic initiatives. She was previously a journalist and had worked as a producer with WAN-IFRA's Media Management Accelerator program. Over to you, Chia Lun.
Okay, great. Welcome everyone to one of the last sessions in this wonderful conference that we have. I think first of all, self-introduction. My name is Jialun Huang from Taiwan, Commonwealth Magazine. I used to work as a reporter, and now I've moved more into the business side. And the topic today is really exciting. It's AI technology. And it's without a doubt one of the most exciting, but perhaps least understood technology that is hitting the newsroom. And today we have three speakers from three different perspectives. Dean will be sharing with us the industry perspective of how AI is adopted globally. And then we have Igor sharing with us how AI is used on the business side. And we have Daryl sharing with us how AI is applied in the newsroom. And without further ado, we'd love to hear what they have to say about AI, this new technology, and how we as a news industry is adopting this. Our first speaker is Dean Roper. He is a long-term editor at WAN-IFRA. He has penned many, many reports and is an avid observer of this industry, seeing how it's transformed over the years. And he has written several reports on AI technology and several other technologies. So take it away, Dean, and tell us how we are using the AI technology.
Thank you so much, Jialun. It's nice to be here. We're going to talk today about this report that we published about a month and a half ago, and it's all based on a survey. So let's get straight into it. So just to start off with, we conducted a global survey back in 2021, early 2021. So it's already been quite some time since the actual survey took place. And maybe that has some explanation for some of the results that we've seen. But we actually did sort of three different surveys. We asked editors certain questions around editorial topics. Then we asked data managers, executives, more on the technical side. And then we also brought in the commercial teams to get their ideas about how things are going. And as you can see, many of the responses we had, of course, since we're based here in Europe, we had a lot from Europe, but it was a quite global survey, not a huge sample size, probably, I think we had about 60 to 70 executives. And also, just before we get into this is what we're talking about today is most of the results of the survey, but the actual report, of course, features a number of case studies. One of those being media from Igor that we'll hear from in a minute, and others as well. And just a little disclaimer, I'm by no means an expert in AI. So let's get into it. And the first part of the survey that we talked about was about sort of gauging the expectations and challenges around what publishers are facing. So this first slide sort of just is one of the big takeaways that we had in at that time in 2021 when we surveyed people to kind of gauge their implementation. And the biggest takeaway was that, at that time, it's obviously in the very early stages of implementation for publishers. So as you can see on the left-hand side there, nearly 50% of the respondents had not even used AI yet. But on the other side, almost 30% had actually fully implemented either one use case or a number of use cases. So that's sort of the where it stands on the adoption side. But on the optimistic side, on the right side, you'll see almost 80% of publishers say that AI is incredibly important to the success of their business by 2024. So we wanted to also ask a little bit to get an idea of how they're structured in terms of their data teams, what their budgets are. So as you can see, staffing is actually relatively low, but that said, there are significant plans, as you can see, to grow their data capacity, also to support AI projects over the next few years. Specifically, 31% of news publishers surveyed said that they will increase their data departments of those that have more than 10 people right now by a rate of 2.6 times that of what they had in 2021. So the big message here is newspapers plan to hire and invest in data, which is not a huge surprise. We had the same takeaway from our World Press Trends report and survey that publishers are, of course, investing heavily in data. On the right-hand side, though, 4% of their total spending budget from the survey we had will be actually dedicated to capacities to support AI. So that is not peanuts. Publishers are indeed getting serious about this. So some of the challenges that the publishers face with adoption, like with any new technology, one as seemingly as complicated as AI, it's not always easy to get the ball rolling. So identifying and developing use cases is obviously a hurdle. But as we will see later, actually, there are many ways to use AI and automation in news media. But it all starts with the money side in the end, right? So here you'll see that fighting for budget today among all other development projects at a news company, it presents its own set of challenges. But here, then you can also see that there are issues with actually producing proven products from AI, and then the use cases, and then getting to see how AI can impact organizational processes. So the next part of the survey was looking at the actual use cases. And sorry, I didn't preface the whole presentation. This report was focused primarily on reader revenue strategies, but also editorial as well. So not surprisingly, as you can see here, we're asking which use cases are most prevalent considering reader revenue, and with so much focus on growth and retention around subscribers being a big topic at the moment. Prediction of conversion and churn likelihood come in as the two most relevant use cases. And there are big plans to ramp up all of that over the next few years, but also this idea of individual paywalls. So as you can see on the right, by 2024, there's a lot of plans to invest. Then the other area that we turned to was content creation. Much of this has to do with content creation through AI and automation, adapting existing content through automation, as well as automation planning. As you can see on the right, there's actually more implementation of these cases than that of reader revenue among publishers, and even more plans. So also on the left there, publishers consider tools that can, planning tools that can help to select relevant topics and types of content. And then there's adaptation of existing content that they consider very crucial to their business. But we've already seen some very interesting cases of automatic content creation with sports, financials, real estate, elections, and more. Might hear some of this from Daryl from AP in a minute. And we did a report actually on news automation a few years ago. You can check with me on that. Then when we talked about content distribution in the survey, this essentially involves determining where, when, and how content should be distributed automatically. There's a lot going on with this, as you can see, in terms of what's implemented there on the right. But what is of big interest, of course, is the idea of personalization, particularly around things like newsletters and certain web pages. But another big topic here is content moderation and how algorithms are used to flag spam, hate speech, potential violence, cyberbullying, and other topics, for example. One of the things we wanted to kind of just look at is kind of get an overall picture about where this, going back to the plans of implementation. If you look at the average rate of adoption of the cases we've profiled, it is indeed actually the use cases of content distribution that are a bit more advanced and have plans in place to invest even more by 2024. But here, it is easy to see that there's much work to be done within the next 2 to 3 years if publishers want to reach this lofty goal of investing more in AI by 2024. So the next area that we touched on was the actual organization of data teams and AI setup within the organizations. So here, one of the first questions that we asked was how publishers are developing their AI strategies in terms of buying software that has AI companies to help out, or working with consultants, or going at it alone. So the big takeaway here is that most publishers are using sort of a combination of these possibilities, but for some individual use cases, many publishers are choosing to develop their own AI solutions where that makes sense, and they have the capacities for certain customized use cases or products. That's quite impressive, as you see the number there of 79%. On the other side, there could already be a proven case that is available from a proprietary software solution that might make more sense to invest in. Something that's not listed here and wasn't actually in the survey is this other possibility that you can partner, of course, with local universities, institutes to collaborate, and even other newspapers to collaborate on special projects. We've seen some of that with smaller publishers, and we've seen a lot of this also in Latin America, for example. So another question was how to best integrate data teams. Kind of want to get an idea of the actual, how the teams are set up also to support AI. And here you see that the majority of publishers have opted for a central data team to kind of oversee the development and for the entire organization, and that the entire organization has access to that capacity. Schickler, who we did the report with, which is a German consultancy based here actually in the north of Germany, they've told us that many of their clients have chosen this solution, and that when that team starts to succeed and grow, then the publishers will start to actually embed data specialists into different departments of the organization to kind of better understand their needs and their challenges. For example, cross-collaboration teams are prevalent at strong subscription-based news publishers. And we'll hear a little bit more about this, I'm sure, from Igor in a minute. And then on this slide, you can see where talking of collaboration, many of the ideas sort of tend to percolate within the actually collaboration teams that could be partly data, tech, and business. Experience shows us that often a data team might come up with a great technical solution that they think would help a business unit, but then that business unit struggles with implementing it. On the flip side, the business teams might come up with a brilliant idea and then the tech teams don't like it. But anyway, we're seeing much more of these cross collaboration teams. And then one of the last things that we wanted to find out was just a little bit about where people are storing their data and their AI data. And not a big surprise, most are storing that in the cloud and a little mix of both. Then lastly, so the report is available on our website. It's available right there at that URL. If you're a WAN-IFRA member, you can download that for free. If you're attending and you're not a WAN-IFRA member, you can email me and I'll be happy to send you the report. As I mentioned, the report has much more results of the survey and real use cases like that of media that Igor will share in a minute. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean. So with Dean's report, which is very industry-wide and global, we'll take a few minutes to see if there's any questions from the audience. If you would like, you can type your question in the live Q&A or in the discussion forum. So my question, Dean, is that this time you've done the report, and I think the first time, I think there was, yes, publishers are thinking of investing in AI. And this time around, that seems to be the case. People are committing and they're saying they're not using it now, but they're definitely investing in. I'm just curious, do you see a tipping point that they're really moving towards this? Because a few years ago, I think that was a similar projection as well. And so do you notice any difference this time around that really publishers are looking forward to do this? Or do you think we're not there yet?
Well, absolutely. I think they're getting serious about it. I would say even that when we did the survey at the beginning of 2021, over that time, we've seen a lot of, we've heard a lot about a number of publishers around the world that are definitely implementing, investing in it. As I mentioned, for example, and there's an organization called The Fix that reports about media. It's just focused on Latin America and Eastern Europe, and the adoption there was very impressive. Much of that was also around collaboration. As I mentioned in our WordPress Trend Survey, one of the biggest investment areas is around data, but also around AI. So it looks like, as usual, the news industry is a little slow for anything a little techy and complicated. But I think they're beginning to see the benefits, not only on the commercial side and advertising and reader revenue, but especially even in the newsrooms, editors are beginning to warm up to the idea of how it can help.
So I think we're seeing a real push and real shift towards investing in AI. Okay. I guess we're still digesting what Dean has to share. Perhaps we'll a little time in downloading the report, and we'll have some time for Q&A later on after our three presenters have completed the report. So let's move on to Igor. Igor is a data scientist. He has a PhD in economics, actually, and he leads quite a big data team at Media, which is one of the biggest subscription-based media organization in the Nordics. And as Dean has mentioned, if you want to do AI, the first thing you have to really have a foundation is data. And who has more data than news organizations? I think the problem is, how do we translate data into something that is insightful and actionable? And that's what Igor has done. And I think that's entirely his focus, is how does he turn data into business and generating business revenue? And now using AI on top of data. Let's hear what he has to say and how he has done that at Media. Let's welcome Igor from Media.
Hi, thank you for a great introduction. Yeah, my background in economics, and you often will hear me talking about the journey from data to value. Today we will focusing more on personalization, but the tools and insights that we discovered along the way will have far more reaching impact in the future than just optimizing our front pages. Amedia, we are a Norwegian company owned by a non-profit foundation. We own mostly local newspapers. You can see them on the map. The number of newspapers is as of 2020. Quite recently, we're past 100 titles, which is incredible. So I've stopped counting them. We exist in order to preserve free journalism, because we believe that this also protects local democracy. Our business idea is very simple. It's journalism. And in order to succeed, we need to deliver relevance and value to our readers and subscribers. And yeah, looking at the development for the last 7 years, it looks like we're on the right track. And we attribute a lot of this to smart use of data. Our data strategy was accepted by our leadership in 2017. And you can see that at the heart of the strategy is AID, user, and also circle around is about content. The remaining part describes how data moves from capture, storage, enrichment, facilitation, analysis, and commercialization. And also you can see there is cybersecurity framework, legal framework, and ethical framework, how we principles on how we operate with infrastructure, user data, ethical aspects, etc. The main building block of personalization, of course, a person. We need a person with some preferences, and we've been focusing a lot on this, having our users logged in. And most of our local newspapers have a logged-in ratio above 80%. In addition, we enrich this data with third-party information like age, gender, or approximately home address. But in general, I would say that we barely use 5% of available information about users. This kind of data allows us to experiment a lot on what I call segment-based top lists, like the site key or title, age, gender, and geography. Yeah, this is also in line with our publisher statement to avoid polarization, but we own newspapers, so we don't have as much entertainment content. So polarization bubbles is not a relevant issue here in general. Another important focus of ours is on information about content. And normally we would hear metadata, tags, and annotation, but specifically on natural language processing, which gives us automatic, consistent, precise information about our content. By using this, we can get content-based personalization, or we can use this information in order to push or filter content on our pages. And what we learned when we started to experiment with this is that infrastructure can be a really showstopper. The important dimensions, of course, are scalability and speed. And this is what was the situation 2 years ago when we experimented with this. We started to use, so customization is when users could use their preferences in order to filter their feed. And then we experimented a lot on this segment-based top lists. But this is not what my team would call personalization, because it doesn't actually use behavioral data. Meanwhile, a lot of companies have demonstrated how personalization drives growth, and also that personalization is not only or just a business opportunity, but also something that users expect. And indeed, personalization is a great way of hacking supply and demand. And as a service, the value of personalization depends on the volume and variety of your content. If you look at the list of our newspapers, it's very easy to imagine that they vary a lot in volume or how many articles they produce. So one of the newspapers up in northern Norway, they produce 2 articles a day. So the value of prioritization is low. But even for larger titles, we run a proof of concept where we discovered that on average, we would only suggest 1 article a day. Not a great impact. But then stimulated or thanks to COVID, we launched Plus Everything. Was impulsive launch just to allow all our readers, subscribers, read all newspapers across the country. And then we packed it as a product, which gave access to 2,000 articles for minor increase in price. 2,000 articles is a lot, and it was very easy to see how personalization can improve relevance, of course. But still, it was a access product. We didn't have actually feed where we could experiment with this. So the last 12 months, we spent on actually figuring out how this feed will be created, that you can subscribe to different topics, how you will put together different sources for content that we recommend or that you want to follow. My team have been focusing on what we call algorithmic personalization, using just behavioral data. So the personalization plan for this new product is that you can customize your feed by subscribing to some topics. Algorithmic recommendation have a twofold system that will give you content that you've missed, sort of collaborative filtering, and also content that you would that looks like what you prefer on our pages. And of course, we will also use these top lists in order to show the breadth of content and depth across the country. But personalization is also a tool. And in order to exploit this tool, we need to understand and define pixel value, monetary value of our pages, and also differentiate between short and long-term effects. So that's why I place business impact in the middle, because it gives us ability to understand what drives attribution, traffic, reach, subscribers, loyalty, and ad revenue. And data science team spends a lot of time on this. So we've created engagement and loyalty indices, which allows us to represent consumption or loyalty in monetary terms, models for bestsellers, popularity, and depth or reading time are important components in our future dynamic paywall. What we call traffic corrector allows us to measure the actual performance of our article, correcting for position, volume, time regularities, etc. We also have something that called dart effect or mix effects, showing, for instance, that if you have too much local news, the effect of this content decreases. And also, of course, short and long-term attribution. So actually understanding our business or this supply or mix imbalances. In my view, this focus on users and content leads to this kind of binary summation. 1 + 1 is 10, because it's the goal for a data strategy is to support our business strategy. So it's very important for us to actually understand more about our business to drive our KPIs. There are 2 main paths how data can bring value. So one on the left side is about optimization, and personalization is a great example of this. On the right side, you can see how the quality of our knowledge about our business can improve our manual decisions. So we talk about descriptive, diagnostic, predictive analytics. And magenta illustrates how dependent you actually on these more advanced analytics or statistical methods in order to create this robust insights or automate this. And I believe also that AI and machine learning, data science are tools, and tools that can be used to improve our business. And very often it's about money, and then it's very easy to focus on optimization. So we talk about reader revenue, engagement, loyalty, traffic, reach, and etc. Personalization is a good way to optimize the relevance of our front pages. But I believe it's not our mission to entertain. So we really need to focus on why do we exist. In economics, we have a great term, goodwill. Goodwill is very often that we believe have value, but it's very difficult to measure. I believe also that the goodwill that or trust and support from our readers explains the development of our sites, of our economy last years. And also I hope that AI will allow us to measure more about why we do exist and not only our KPIs. Yes, now I've reached, maybe we can have some questions.
Thank you, Igor. You've given a very interesting presentation. I was really surprised that you have 80% of your users that are logged in. I think that's a tremendous number because I don't know, across our sites, it's extremely difficult to get people to be logged in, and that's the the foundation for you to get all that behavioral data, because then you can match to the person. So I'm curious, how did you get? I don't know. For us, it's really difficult for people to log on. So I'm just curious, how did you layer that? Because it's an extremely important foundation before you can get all that data matched up. So how did you? Was there a process, or was it always that high? Did you do something beforehand? Because I'm baffled.
we have a separate team that focuses a lot about keeping people logged in and to make it as easy as possible. And of course, and this is maybe what we again can call goodwill, because many of our non-subscribers, they stay logged in. And of course, we try to allow them or make it as easy as possible to stay logged in. And of course, we also hope that we can use personalization to give them even more incentives to be logged in.
But you said even though with the 80% that are logged in, you're only using 3 to 5% of the available information. That's a big concept. Tell us more about that.
It's more about the depth of information we have on the users. And in Norway, we have a policy of a lot of open data. So you can find a lot of information that is sensitive. And when I say that we only use 5%, it's roughly that if we have 200 columns describing you as a person, then we probably use only 3. So then it's 1.5% of available information. But again, if we include also a lot of other behavioral data dimensions, then this number is even smaller.
So
it's like focusing on low-hanging fruits, not to make it too complicated, and also that we're not so many people, so we need to really focusing on this low-hanging fruits. Yes.
But it sounds like you have a lot of work to do if that's where you're starting, right?
Yeah, definitely.
I'm curious, Igor, because it sounds like, I mean, you have an entire structure of how you help, in terms of data, and also how AI could really optimize business. I'm curious, so far, has there been, I'm sure there's some numbers you could show where AI has helped you, whether enhance conversion or increased engagement or improved your login. Could you share some numbers to at least give us some hope or even more eagerness to adopt AI or to move towards that? I'm just curious if you have any accomplishment on that one.
Yeah, we had a huge churn initiative focusing on how we can optimize win back and all these steps on the onboarding of our new customers and keeping them in this subscription mode. And if you don't know a person's loyalty, then it's you one size fits all. You basically do the same that we used to do on French page, one size fits all. But if you can segment your subscribers, then you can have different actions, of course. So the loyalty indexes helps us to be more focused on what kind of actions, back action for subscribers or people who want to leave us. The same is for this Dart effect. So what we could measure very easily in A/B tests, that we only just improving the increasing share of open articles that you see on our pages when you are not subscriber, we increase your engagement, because it's much easier to find this open content. And vice versa, of course. If we increase number of bestsellers, the articles that actually trigger this subscription mode on the top of your feed, people will buy more.
I'm sure. But I'm just curious, how much more, and how much have you been able to?
Yeah, it's some of these A/B tests, they are not significant, so zero effect. And sometimes you will see like 20-30% increase in engagement.
Okay. All right. I have more questions, but we have limited time, so let's move on to our next speaker. We have more time for Q&A at the end of all the presentations. Our next speaker is Doral from AP. As you know, AP is a very big news organization and a lot of content. And what's exciting is that Doral is using AI in their reporting and in the newsroom. We have always heard about sports and news, maybe in financial reports, but the application is much greater in newsrooms. And let's hear from Doral and see how they're using it in the AP newsroom. Take it away, Doral.
Thanks, Xiaolun, and it's good to be here. Thanks to everyone who's taking part in this session. So my name is Doral. I'm Vice President of News and oversee global production at the Associated Press. And of course, we're a global news agency, but we work with a lot of partners in the AI space. And being a news agency, it is all about the journalism. And if we just advance to, I'm going to show you just a few photographs, because this is what it's really all about. This is a photograph taken from Ukraine, and we're enormously proud of the work of our teams on the ground. And this picture isn't just of a family, it's of a family separating when the father was having to stay behind and he's saying goodbye to his daughter here. I find some of these pictures enormously heart-wrenching, and this is really about the power of eyewitness journalism, but also about journalism itself. And if journalism is about making sense of your world or making sense of your locality, then it's fundamentally about human connection and the emotions that come from that. So just a quick flick through the next couple of photographs. This next one was used by many organizations around the world, and it shows a woman who was caught up in the maternity hospital attack and later died. My colleague Yevgeny Maloletka was at the scene when this happened in Mariupol. And then the next one shows the power of emotion and the power of grief and despair. And this next photograph is really about joy and love. And the story behind this is a father and son were reunited in a place called Zaporizhia, near the east of Ukraine. Only people can find these moments and take these photographs, and only people can make the connections which make these more than just images, more than just photographs with underlying metadata, but about emotions and stories. And that's where I want to start talking about AI. And from really the very beginning of AP's journey, working with automation and AI, it's really about empowering our people, not replacing them, liberating people from tedious work in order to get to the higher value journalism and to see things like these pictures in a way that no machine can. But AI and automation has a place. And part of that place is there's so much content, and in part, you know, the AP is responsible for that, as are other agencies and other news providers, and we're all dealing with so much content. This is a screenshot just from last Friday of our multi-channel live service. So last year alone, we generated 23,500 hours of original live content, and that's a figure that's just growing naturally year on year. We generated 440,000 unique news stories and 1 million photographs. Layer on top all of the UGC, we're having to source, verify, and acquire. And then there's myriad stories appearing from myriad sources. And on top of that, there's a weight of information, both good information and bad, that comes to us from social media. And that is the sense of the scale of the problem and the scale of what we want to try and tackle using machines and using algorithms to help us cut corners, but not cut corners with speed and processing as opposed with the underlying journalism. And that's where AI and automation comes in. So this next slide shows a very simplistic view of where some of the places that we have found we can automate. And to be honest, there are more use cases beyond that. But if you think of the value chain between news gathering, people out in the field, or doing interviews, or talking to people on phones, and doing the core journalism, and then producing that content and turning it into watchable stories, readable stories, shareable stories, and then driving them out and distributing those stories to audiences. That's where the crossover comes in. So between news gathering and production, there are internal use cases that we've found to do with helping our own information flows. We have a decentralized newsroom. We don't have one hub where everyone sits. I'm sitting in London, but I'm dealing with colleagues today who are out in the field or who are in production centers all over the world. So, and that information flow is a real challenge for us. Tagging and metadata so that we can use the content, whether it's text or photographs or video or graphics or audio or other story forms, in the most reliable, in the most efficient way. Tracking that content, the media management around it is a big issue for us. Finding, verifying, clearing material is also an issue. How do you find something? How do you quickly get to the first poster of a story, of an image? And then handling and making sense of data, and doing that in a way where you're not just driving it into the hands of specialists, but where you're able to kind of unlock that and spread it across the organization. And I've got a good example I'll show you in a moment of how we've done that. And then between production and audiences, this is really about, external facing automation, both to create content, and tagging metadata is as important externally as it is internally. So helping people find the content they want, or maybe they don't know they want. Optimizing content, we heard Igor talking about that. For user behavior, that's a common industry-wide theme. Localization is something that we've, as a global news agency, this wouldn't necessarily have been obvious to us 10 years ago, but part of our challenge is to try and help our customers manage what we're putting out in a way that helps them tell their stories and find their audiences. So the localization piece is super important. And then, of course, there's production shortcuts. How do we deal with so much content? So I'm going to pack a lot into this slide. It looks deceptively simple on this next one, but I just want to run through some examples of how we're applying automation. So there's audio to text transcription. We've been using a service for a little while to great effect. And that has allowed collaboration. It's not just about taking a press conference or taking a story, but it's then about having different teams of journalists in different parts of the world collaborate on that transcription and tell different stories with it. So something from a president or a prime minister might be useful to a business team as much as the politics team, as much as another specialist team. Text-to-text translation is becoming increasingly important for us. I would add, we're never going to let machines just do that and not check it. So this is about supercharging the person, but not supercharging the effort that the person can bring to something, but not replacing that effort. They need to check the accuracy. One of the things we do is we create semi-produced video clips. We do about 80,000 of them a year. Again, those are unique stories that we send out. And that's to help our customers tell stories. So they, if you like, we're the engine in a lot of people's cars where we're supplying the content, and they take it and put it into their websites, into their news broadcasts and so on. And they need to know what's in the picture, when it was shot, what the person's saying. And so we create something called shot lists, and it's a very manual process. And we've partnered up with a couple of providers and really developed this with them to automatically create shot lists in predictable environments. On the red carpet, people going to red carpets for entertainment venues, they do very predictable things. And you can teach the machine what they are and generate a shot list from that. And so now we've got machines doing really quite sophisticated things, understanding when a scene changes or when a shot changes, and then measuring that so that people can read the shot list and understand what's going on in the video and then tell a story to address that. Tagging content for search. Search is incredibly important for us, and that also leads to curation of content so that we're joining up the dots. We aspire to be a story-first organization rather than an organization that produces lots of text, lots of photos, lots of video. We're story-first, so we're telling the best stories in the best way possible for our customers and our audiences. Writing stories based on data. We'll show you an example of this. We've been doing it for about 8 years. This is not unique to us, but it has been a great time saver. The localization is super important, both in terms of how you address individuals, but how our colleagues in the industry are able to access the content. Sharing usable data, that's the piece I was talking about, accessing data that other teams can use. And surfacing stories as they develop, using algorithms to detect when there is activity, maybe on social media, around a breaking news development, and it draws our eye to it to make sure that we're not missing any breaking news. And for us, speed is of the essence. It's a competitive world, and that's how we're using AI today. So I just want to give you a couple of examples. The first one on the next slide is data to text. So again, this is something we've been doing since 2014, and colleagues of mine have spoken extensively on this in the past, but we use natural language generation to create stories by following a template from data sets. And every quarter, we would write about 300 stories during an intense 3-week period. So that took out pretty much every person's effort on our business team to create these market reports. And we automated it, and they went from 300 stories to 3,700 stories without human intervention. There's a lot of background work, making sure the data sets were accurate, making sure the templates were just right. What that did was it freed up the entire business team to then figure out which of those stories were then needed journalism attached to it. Not just the example here is Apple, topping Q1 forecasts in a particular year, but is there a story we need to look at behind that, whether it's about this company or something else? And what can be applied to business stories, we've applied to sports stories and any area where there's clean access to reliable data. So internally, this next example was from, on this next slide, is from, relates to the internal flow of information. So we created this COVID-19 tracker 2 years ago. And it was really a result of, we have an excellent health and safety team based in New York, but with colleagues dispersed around the globe. And one of our specialists was finding he was besieged by requests internally to get the right data for somebody's state in the US or somebody's region. And what we created was this accessible internal tool complete with these graphics. So these are embeddable graphics taken from data sets that showed people's attitudes to COVID, people's attitudes to masking, how many people had been vaccinated, what the rates of death and infection were. And this, again, it allowed not just us to save the effort of one person, but for us to share the information in a meaningful way so that we could do way more journalism than we could have done otherwise if we bottlenecked it with that one person. I mentioned localization on this next slide. We see this as a real time saver for editors. This is really something we've put a lot of effort into in the United States, partly because an awful lot of our customers there are very local customers, sometimes serving small town communities. And we were assuming that when we put out a story with large data sets, that it was down to the customer newsroom to figure out how that would be localized. 25 years ago, I used to work at Scottish Television in Glasgow, and it's what we used to call putting a kilt on a story. How do you make it relevant to your local audience? But we found that actually there's a part of this that we can play. We've got access to the data set. So what we do is we take that data and allow people to access it. And then if we move on to the next slide, you can see that we create these localization guides that we effectively distribute to editors. We give them access to the data set so they can drill down into it in their localities. And then we tell them suggested questions to ask, or people they could perhaps go to help round out the stories and make it truly their own. So that it's not just a homogenous story from the AP where it's, one story that then gets distributed to many, but it's one story that they can make their own. And that's something that has become apparent to us that is very important. This next slide I'll just flash up for a moment. So in ancient times in Europe and the Middle East, if all roads led to Rome, then today for us, on the next slide, please, all roads really lead to metadata. And for us, this is super important. Just understanding what our metadata is across all these myriad pieces of information we're dealing with will enable us to future-proof ourselves so that we can enable future technologies, future AI that we haven't, if we could just go back, please, that we haven't yet yet allowed for. So by sorting out metadata now, we feel, and which is a big job for us because we have different metadata sets in different places, by joining all that up, we will enable a future that we can't quite understand yet, but we know is important. So we want to have clean metadata in order to go on that journey. I'll just briefly mention, I've got 4 more slides, so I'll just whisk through these very quickly. We did a survey on local news in the US, and we can post this in the chat so you can have a look at it because it's a useful primer. There are universal lessons here around the industry, and it debunks some of the it translates some of the heavy, dense terminology into something that's quite usable. What we found was, as we talk about metadata and automation and all these things, there's a massive gap between the big players at the top end of the industry and people who have smaller teams, smaller staffs, trying to really grapple with this, not having the time, not having the expertise, and not sure how they're going to get into it. So we partnered with the Knight Foundation, and we did this survey. And if we just move on, we found there's strong support to adopt AI. Sorry, can we move on to the next slide, please? And there were key findings from that, which again are probably not, some of these are obvious, some of these are common sense, and some of these are kind of big insights. But news gathering, people felt that transcription, that some of the stuff I was talking about earlier would be a massive help. In production, automating page layouts for, in the way that some of the presentation tools we have today will take a couple of photographs and suggest how they're laid out, then that would help transform that. So for the interest of time, I'll skip through this bit and let you read that report itself. So the last couple of slides then, some of the challenges, fear and trust. Fear that this is a common one with people who haven't dealt with AI before. Am I going to be automated out of a job? No, you're not. We're here to support journalism, not to erode it. Can you trust the data set? Can you trust the tool will do the right thing? Slow adoption, people get in their groove. They like doing the work in the way they've always done it. And so presenting them with a tool that maybe challenges that leads to things not happening as quickly as you'd like. It's experimental in nature, which means that you have to get it wrong a few times to get it right. And sometimes that leads to people saying, this doesn't work, I'm not using it. There's a multiplicity of solutions. So different AI vendors and suppliers have come at this from different viewpoints, and trying to get the right tool for you is what we have found is quite difficult. So we have to figure out not just what the journey is, but how you're going to build the car, the vehicle that gets you there. So it's quite a nuanced problem. Training core workflows, you can bring in a tool and say, right, do it for this thing, and then train that thing. And the brighter members of staff, the more adventurous members of staff will find other uses for it, and maybe create workflows that are really innovative, or create workflows that you can't really support, and that's a challenge. And then the scale of the task is something that I've gone into before. So I'll leave it there, and sorry for scraping in right on time.
Oops. Thank you, Daryl. It's quite a representation. You know, you talked a lot about real issues and some of the technologies that I'm dying, I'm sure, for our editorial team to get a hold of, especially those transcription services, and it saves a lot of time. So just a real quick question. We've seen a lot of advantages you've listed, you know, and those are all efficiencies. You know, no one likes to transcribe, and the fact that you could, you know, help people localize stories, that means they could, you know, really bump up their production, right? So with all that benefits, it's still very difficult to persuade Newsroom to adopt AI. And obviously that's because having to change workflows or to adopt a new technology, it's a big cost. And sometimes, even with all those perceived benefits, in the beginning, it's a lot of investments, a lot of changing, and sometimes you have to train the algorithm. In the beginning, it probably won't work so well. So I'm just curious, it must take a lot of commitment, especially from editorial leadership, to overcome the initial drop in inefficiencies. And I'm curious for AP, how did you overcome the initial hurdle? Could you share a little bit of that? Because I think we're all facing that challenge.
You put the question in the past tense. How did we overcome it?
And sorry, it's a present tense, still ongoing.
Present tense question. How are we overcoming it? And that's something that is not a one and done, because different people need different inputs in order to see the way forward. And we create champions. So we tend to find people who are going to be enthusiastic about it. There's a light bulb moment where they go, okay, I can see how this can work. I can see how I can apply it. And then we ask those champions to be the kind of in the team person helping people on the journey. It's no use me coming in kind of top down, saying, you know, finger wagging, you must use this, because nobody's going to want to be told what to do. They have to see it for themselves. So that's our general approach. But I'm joking, and I'm not. It is an ongoing journey. There's some things we've got which are really cool, which we can't get some people to adopt, and that it takes time. It takes time to turn a tanker.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Well, we have a question in here, and I can see that's coming. That's probably what a lot of journalists would worry about: AI taking over and producing journalistic work from all the data that we have, especially how we're coding each and every article. What do you have to say to that, Daryl? The fact that we no longer need writers, is that
that is so that is not the takeaway from what I've got to say. So we need writers, we need specialist photographers, we need beautiful writers, we need editors who can look at a story and elevate it. We need video producers who can look at a video and cut it in a way that's going to be really get it watched. So no, this does not replace any of those people, but it takes away what I would call some of the grunt work. So even when the machine does a transcription, we need to check it, and then we need to look at it and say, right, we need a writer. I think there's a difference between automating what happened in the Premier League football match between Manchester United and Chelsea, and then giving a match report. One tells you the score, the other tells you what really happened on the pitch. And you're always going to need a writer or a journalist to tell you what really happened. So there is no replacement here. It's a way of getting rid of the mundane stuff so you can focus on the stories that matter.
I think that's the key message, that it's a great tool and it's helping us to do our job better as journalists. Okay, so we're now moving into the panel discussion, and we're open for questions. So if you have any questions, feel free to throw it in the Q&A or the discussion forum. Now, I think Igor and Daryl have presented from the business side and the editorial side how AI could help our work. And I'm just curious, Dean, from your perspective, since you've surveyed so many news organizations, have you seen more news organizations adopting AI on the business side and then shifting over to the editorial, or vice versa, or simultaneously? What's the entry point for AI have you observed in the industry?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on, for example, a news organization's strategy. I mean, their content strategy, their business strategy. So, for example, if you're a strong subscription base, if you're really going after digital subscriptions and things like that, there are a lot of ways that, that's kind of a trend in its own, but also automation can help with that in terms of, as I mentioned before, churn and conversion and prediction, but many other things around engagement that can sort out these segmented audiences, and it all kind of ties in together. And then eventually that touches editorial, of course, as well. But what I mentioned in the survey is, it seems like, as Daryl talked about, I think the AP was one of the early pioneers around automation and around content creation. So a lot of that has been going on, I think, in the simplistic ways. And they've elevated that, but around sports, finance, and sort of those things. But we had a session. I can't remember. Maybe it was in November. It was with News 24 in South Africa, and I think it was somebody from McClatchy, and they were talking around the actual newsroom and this whole idea of getting editors on board and that sort of thing. I think it's what Daryl touched on. It's slowly getting much better, but you need that. You need that one thing that works. You need to show that one thing that really can work, and get the buy-in, not just from the editors, but the champions in the newsroom. And but I think that's starting to change, because I know me, for a journalist, whether it's to report or anything, if any of this mundane work can go away, I'll be thrilled with it. But the point to your question is, I think it's if we just looked at the numbers we had on the implementation side, it was actually what's working more at the moment is more on the content automation and content creation, because I think they got started. But it's slowly, absolutely. There's a lot going on in advertising as well, which we didn't touch on. But especially for reader revenue strategies, and engagement and those sorts of things, that's really taken off.
So it began with content automation, because that's the most, I can basic, or we can take away the mundane stuff, but it's moved on to subscription and automating that processes as subscription is becoming the mainstream strategy. I'm curious from Daryl and Igor's perspective, because Igor has mentioned that it's an AI strategy. It seems like it's a management decision to move towards that. Is that also the case for AP? I'm just curious about how you come to where you are. Is this a top-down initiative years ago, and then it's kind of shifted, ripple down, or has it, was it a bottom-up approach? Or just curious how that has played out in your respective organization.
So for AP, really it's about, we've seen individual challenges which needed to be solved and met. So I'd say it was, some of these different approaches have solved very specific challenges. So it's not been this kind of organizational wide approach. But having done that a few times, we then took a step back, and then you can see a kind of landscape where automation and AI in particular is helping us across the enterprise. And part of the issue is, of course, in a decentralized environment, understanding what's available and what tools are available and the implementation you need to get there. And so, you could have one team somewhere else doing something that would really apply to many other use cases, but that's one of the things we're coping with. We're cracking that very well now. We recognize it as part of our future and our present. It's just a part of our day-to-day life now. And so the question for us is, how do we best implement it? How do we make it as frictionless as possible? But as I say, empowering the journalism and making sure that what Igor talked about, the ethical nature of it, is really underpinning the technology. We don't adopt technology because it's cool. We adopt technology because it helps us with our mission.
So it sounds like for AP, started with pockets or individual problems, and then it's now gone to, okay, how does one team success translate to other team and kind of spread out to the entire organization? It sounds like you're on the verge of, already becoming a culture of that slowly. How did it play out in media? It sounds like it's more centralized, maybe, Igor?
Yes, we are centralized. We're supporting our newspapers. So media, people who work in media, we actually have to reach out to newsrooms. They're not sitting in the same city or building, of course. But for us, it's the same sort of supporting, first of all, on content distribution. So your content can reach relevant people, and the insights part of it, so understand what works and what doesn't work, and then balance between the short-term and long-term effects, because in the end, newspapers are still businesses, so they need to earn money, but they have a mission, and they, in their daily life routine, they need to have some tools in order to be able to balance between the short-term and long-term. For instance, even in subscription business, if you're just focusing on converting people into subscribers, your reach is going to collapse. You just saturate your own reach, and without investing in this reach, you will just reach your maximum potential, and that's it. You will stop growing in a couple of years. But finding a balance where we can balance the short-term and long-term and business and mission is also, I think, important way how we can support newsrooms.
Okay, so it sounded like from Amedia, it's also trying to solve problems, and then starting from there, becoming a more group strategy.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk a lot about AI, but in the end, we need to bring value, whether it's monetary or some ephemeral like goodwill.
So what's an advice you would give news organizations who want to try it out? Where do they start?
For me, it's about supply and demand. It's about users and content. It's in the end boring metadata and boring logged in ratio, etc. But it gives you synergies, so you can build much more valuable products in the future, not only personalization and etc. So you can actually build your own understanding of your audience, of your business, which is, I think it's much more valuable investment, because we talk a lot about automation, but the most important decision is still going to be made by humans also in the future. So increasing their knowledge, their understanding is, I think it's much more fruitful path.
And to understand it, you need to have all those metadata labels and everything, and logged in users. So you're saying, well, the first step to AI is to making sure that you have those infrastructures in place. But I don't know, that takes quite a while to implement. And before you have that, it's very hard to have meaningful data sets. It's always the problem that we have. What would you recommend, Earl, if someone wants to start? What would you recommend?
So have a look at the report, which I think has been posted in the Q&A. So, I mean, I don't think you need to, I think the best position in highly centralized companies is get your infrastructure right first and then proceed. But how we saw it, by the nature of how it came about in our organization, we were able to tackle individual problems and tackle them quickly by not trying to get to perfection first. So I think it depends on the organization. You know, if by adopting a tool or a workflow, will you end up in a bigger mess with metadata down the track? In that case, pause and figure it out. But I would say, I agree with what Igor said about value. Figure out what problem you're trying to solve. Focus on the solutions to that problem. Don't focus on the tool that does really interesting, cool things that maybe we could adopt it and see what happens. You focus really on the end state, and understanding that the environment that we're in, the technology is changing all the time, and not always for the best. So, you know, don't adopt a tool just because it's there. Adopt a tool because it provides a solution for you specifically.
Okay, well, thank you so much to Dean and Daryl and Igor. I think in this panel, we've heard about how the industry is moving towards AI. And from Igor, it's showing how we can add value on the business side, especially. And I think Daryl just showed us how there's so many mundane tasks that could be automated, that could allow us to do journalism better. I'm sure next year, this time, we will have more examples as more publishers adopt this technology. Thank you so much to our presenters. I will pass the floor now back to Kawai.
Thank you, Chia-Lun, and our speakers, Dean, Igor, and Daryl, once again. That was a very stimulating and informative session. I hope our audience take away from this session is that AI in the newsroom is here today and something they could start looking into if they have not already done so. And if they really started dabbling in it, to put more resources into it to stay ahead of their competition. Once again, we'd like to thank our sponsors for the generous support. Platinum sponsors, Google. Gold sponsors, Nordot. Bronze sponsors, Idios Media, Chartbeat Piano, and Protect Media. We also like to acknowledge our media partners, G Express and Telum Media. To all of you, a very big thank you. Also, please remember to visit our sponsors in the virtual marketplace where you can download information about their products and services as well as watch their videos. You can also find their contact details to connect with them. Tomorrow, Thursday, is the final day of this year's Asian Media Leaders Summit. With only one session, and it's in the morning. To round things off, we have a very futuristic and exciting session about the metaverse and NFTs and how all these have a part to play in the media industry. We will also have a metaverse demo, which is very exciting. It's almost like a computer game, so please look out for it. The session will start at 10 a.m. Singapore time, 9 a.m. Jakarta. We look forward to seeing you tomorrow, and thank you.